I'm sure you could find an ethical and environmentally friendly way to make heroin, wouldn't make it a good thing for me to consume it.
What in the Paul Morgan is going on right now? That you cannot convince me that this isn't intended to be covert propaganda for this woman's conservative political beliefs. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name is Mickey. I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapy things on this channel. And today we were talking about this video that actually got recommended to me by one of our Discord server members. Shout out to our server. You can join in the Descripy. Our channel members and patrons at the $5 and above level get access to the server where you can recommend things that I can talk about on the channel. But this video is called The Absolute Degeneracy of Modern Writing by a channel called The Second Story. I was recommended this video because it is apparently a rotten take. So I watched it ahead of time. Spoilers. I know, I kind of missed the days when we did unprepared reaction videos, but watching it ahead of time gave me a chance to look up some research that is relevant. So we're going to talk about this. I have lots of thoughts. So let's just get into it.
I've been noticing that there are a lot more aspects that have been contributing to the decline of literature besides just a lack of understanding regarding the fundamentals.
Sure.
Today, I would like to focus on one of the most glaring issues plaguing modern publishing.
In big letters, smut. Okay. This is really something. Real quick, before we get further into this video, I want to give a quick caveat that I am in fact not at all educated on the topic of literature, of writing, especially of fiction writing. I've talked on the channel before about how obviously going to grad school, you're educated about how to find good quality research and whatever. This is not my lane. So let me be very clear. I am not at all trying to come for this lady's wig about how to write or any of those things. That's not my business. If this lady wants to teach people how to write things, I think that's great. What we are going to talk about are some of the claims that are made in this video that are something. So just for what it's worth.
Something you hear a lot is that women have come to dominate the literary world more and more. We'll look closer at those numbers later, but for now I think we can all agree that female writers have achieved fame and success comparable to a lot of their male predecessors and contemporaries.
Yeah.
But the female writing, which is most often presented as proof of this, is things like this, despite the fact that there have always existed things like this.
Okay.
I'm personally of the opinion that the literary world is so rife with corruption and ideologies that any observation along these lines is meaningless. Generally, across the board, it isn't really men or women who dominate the literary world, it's ideologies and popular trends in social politics, whatever those might be at a given time. Historically, a lot, not all, but a lot of the most widely celebrated female writers, especially within the 20th and 21st centuries, have been at the bleeding edge of social and political progressivism. To my mind, this makes it less about being a woman and more about being an acolyte of a particular ideology.
See, this is annoying. Let's talk about intersectionality and about the importance of addressing multiple factors of folks' identity, right? When we talk about in any industry, the progressivism of, in this case, feminism, right? It's very important that we address the issues, the barriers, the prejudice that folks overcome in order to be successful in a particular realm. The take that it doesn't really matter whether somebody is a female writer or not, because ultimately it's more about what they're writing than who they are, is false, right? This is just false across the board. It's not that those ideals aren't important, but to not address the multiple identity factors that do very much limit people's ability to be successful, it's giving all lives matter, right? The take of well, it's not about that. It's just about what somebody's writing. That's all that should matter. Sure, that's all that should matter, but it's not though, right? In every industry, I'm sure that literature is no exception. Women, anybody who is AFAB, especially folks that have names even that are deemed to be feminine, are very much discriminated against as being less serious, as being less quality than their male counterparts. And so to not address that is just silly, in my opinion. Real quick, I want to interrupt myself to tell you that I'm a changed man, because I used to be somebody who spent an obscene amount of money on Black Friday deals, and now I spend money on things that change my life and actually last forever, like a Beducated membership. I want to say thank you to Beducated for sponsoring this week's video, because y'all know that I love Beducated, and I love them even more for their Black Friday deals. So in case you're not familiar, Beducated is an online platform that is dedicated to all things sex and relationship learning. They have over 150 courses that are all led by industry experts that are filled with reliable and safe information, and also things like video tutorials and practical exercises that can very much change your sex life. At least for me, it's changed my sex life pretty significantly. If you're at all like me, you might not have grown up with a lot of information about sex, least of all fact-based information. So I really appreciate that Beducated's courses have allowed me to learn the fact-based things that I didn't know, but also really come into my empowerment and my sexuality in myself. It's really made a difference in my confidence and also just like in the way that I be fucking. So I appreciate Beducated so much for that. And I want to share that with you. Beducated has a special discount for Black Friday. If you use my code Mickey Atkins 69, you can get 65% off of the annual pass, which locks in that price for life, which means their yearly pass is only $69. So go click that link in the description. They also have a 14-day money-back guarantee, so you can test it out. But I'm telling you, go click that link. Do something nice for yourself because you deserve it. And thank you, Beducated, for sponsoring this week's video. Let's go ahead and hop back in.
Nevertheless, it is somewhat true that right now women somewhat dominate the publishing industry. First of all, some housekeeping.
Which we're
Apparently,
upset about?
I will be punished in some mysterious way if I use a certain word in my videos. This word has 4 letters, starts with a P, ends with an N, and there's also an O and an R in there too. So for the course of this video, I'll have to refer to it differently. All right, to start with, let's just push aside any conversation about taste. This is not going to be a video about what I like or don't like to read. What I am offering you in this video is not my opinion or my reading preference, it is facts. And the first thing we need to establish...
So I want you to note that, right? We're at the outset setting the expectation that this video is about factual material.
...is that all this so-called romance fiction and most, if not all, of the current women's literature out there is not women's literature. It's...
Also, before we go any further, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it in my comment section about me rolling my eyes or about my facial expression. I have been looking at my fucking computer for like 72 hours solid and my eye won't stop twitching, okay? I'm also autistic and look away from the camera a lot. So I'm not rolling my eyes at anybody. I mean, I might, but if I do, I'll try to make it very pronounced and obvious. But if I'm being a weirdo about my eyeball, it's because my eyelid won't stop twitching and I feel like my contact lens is going to fall right out of my fucking head. So...
As a woman, the most common defense I hear for romance fiction, especially the romance fiction that is so prevalent today, is that it is literature for women. Whenever anyone tries to express some concern about these genres or the nature of their content, that person is immediately condemned for being anti-woman or anti-women's literature. The idea being that these types of books are not just popular among women, but that they define womanhood, and to be opposed to them in any way is to be opposed to women. Women such as myself who are critical of these books are often said to be suffering from internalized misogyny. The reality about all this is that...
Okay, so this is the thing. From the jump, right, we set the expectation that we're talking about facts. This video is about factual material. And now we've devolved into, like immediately devolved into, if you criticize the existence of smut, then people label you as anti-woman and anti-feminism, which is not true. People who shit on smut, adult entertainment that is intended to be consumed by women, when you're doing it from a place of misogyny, then folks are going to label you as misogynist. I feel like that's a fair rule of thumb. But when we are saying, you know, I don't like it, or I think this book was just like poorly written. We talked about Colleen Hoover on this channel. That is an inherently anti-woman. The issue is why we're shitting on the medium, not if we're shitting on the medium. And this exaggerated take is an example of what it looks like when somebody is setting up an argument in bad faith. Like from the get-go, I have a lot of problems with the orientation that we're choosing to take here and having this conversation.
It isn't a question of woman versus anti-woman or even woman versus man. The issue here is probably one of the oldest ones in existence. It's the normalization of explicit adult entertainment. Whether it's women or men who are trying to do that is pretty irrelevant, because the number one reason anyone has ever tried to normalize this kind of, you know, explicit content is money. But
okay, so first of all, You know what? Actually, I'm just going to let her keep going.
I'm getting a little
Go
ahead
ahead,
of
Queen.
myself. First of all, we need to establish this fact very, very clearly. Women's literature is not, just some randomly horny trend in the book industry. In that sense, outside of a handful of odd entries here and there, women's literature doesn't exist. Women haven't taken over the literary world. A 4-letter word starting with P has taken over the literary world. Barnes & Noble and every other major and independent bookseller, especially all those new romance bookshops, have now just become another kind of adult entertainment store. And no, that's not a good thing.
Why?
Now, I know what you might be thinking. This is not XXX adult entertainment. This is. You are actually incorrect. For a man, average man, I don't know, reading an explicit depiction of a sex act might not really get the job done. Men typically tend to gravitate towards seeing the act on the screen in one form or another. Women have always, on average, preferred to read it, even if some do end up hooked on the filmed version. The female mind has pretty much the same reaction, generally speaking, to the written version. In fact, written erotic content tends to have even more of an impact on the minds of women than filmed erotic content. Why? Because men and women engage with media in fundamentally different ways. When it comes to adult entertainment, your simple, straightforward 2 people banging video isn't really going to do much of anything for a woman, generally speaking. There have been numerous studies done regarding female sexuality or the differences between male and female arousal, and generally across the board, they'll tell you that women require what is sometimes called mental mapping to be sexually aroused.
Couple of things. Oh my God. First of all, good for me. That took all of the strength in my body to let her finish that thought. First of all, we've talked extensively on this channel about sex tips, for lack of a better term, about sexuality, about human sexuality and relationships and all of the things, right? We have so many videos about it. I think I have a whole playlist about it. The concept of mental framing is something that is pretty prevalent in regard to folks who have been assigned female at birth. We know that often folks in self-report data tell us that that type of arousal is more common for them, right? And the reduction of sexuality, first of all, to a binary sucks. Yeah, don't love that. But also, this is like to me, this was the moment in the video where there was like a little antenna, because this is giving like evangelical Christian vibes, right? The like, well, men are visual creatures. This is a thing that like fundies especially, they love to tell people that this is the reason that purity culture and modesty culture exists, because men are visual creatures. They can't be expected to control themselves like a human if there's visual stimulation in their vicinity. But women are just much more complicated. Women just have such a complicated sense of sexuality. And so, of course, it's not your husband's fault that he can't satisfy you, because you just need all these silly little brain things. And men are simple. This is a garbage ass fucking take. And I'm not saying that she said that, but what I am saying is that this assertion is pretty fucking close to those things, right? This is why it's important for us to be conscientious consumers of media, especially on the internet, because when we set up a YouTube video in front of like a little bookshelf with the candles and we're, with the coffee and the whole thing, we're setting this scene in a very like, I'm an academic kind of way, and I want to talk to you about facts. And so I'm going to tell you all of these things that sound very factual. This is not factual. I also want to point out that research that's conducted through the use of self-report data is not science in the way that research is conducted by like evaluating, for example, like a bodily response like pulse or blood pressure or eye movement, etc. Those are very different things. And it's important that we be aware that when folks cite research that is primarily reliant on self-report data, there are inherent flaws in that. Not only because self-report data is pretty unreliable, because like humans are unreliable, right? For example, eyewitness testimony is more and more becoming a thing that is not really reliable in court because we are not great like narrators, but also because we actually have research to demonstrate the way that self-report data in studies about sex and sexuality is super fucking unreliable for folks that are assigned female at birth because of the shame and stigma that is associated with the concept of sex and arousal for those folks. We as a society way, way, way more stigmatize that concept for women, to use binary terms, than we do for men, right? It's important that we be aware of that. We actually have data to prove that when asked about this in just a sort of, nondescript general question, folks that were assigned female at birth were much more likely to underreport and essentially lie about the degree to which they engage with material that provokes sexual arousal, right? What we're talking about. When assured that this was anonymous and when provided the opportunity to share this data anonymously, that number went way the fuck up. This tells us that the shame and stigma associated with discussing that topic makes self-report data fucking unreliable. So using this assertion, it's flawed in several ways, which is, again, a problematic take to start out the argument for why smut is like a barnacle on the ass of the field of literature, especially when we said that we're going to start this take by using factual material. This is not factual material.
That is, there needs to be more story and more opportunity for her to feel empathy. That's just how it is for a woman. Empathy is a huge factor for women in all aspects of their lives, but yes, especially when it comes to erotic media.
Not the gender
With
essentialism.
written explicit content as opposed to your typical material found on the hub, it's a lot easier for the woman to imagine herself as the female in the scene. In addition, as I said, women require an emotional element to their erotic content that is almost impossible in the simple filmed scenes that can so easily do it for men, typically. That is to say, watching Mrs. Smith bang the mailman while her husband is at work is plenty for most men, but a woman will want to know the whole story. She'll want...
This is also such a reductionist take about human sexuality. Can we address that? There's a couple of things that I take issue with this. First of all, when we reduce people to a binary, first of all, we're missing out on all of the shades of gray that exist within our spectrum of gender and sexuality. But second of all, when we reduce folks that we are assigning the label of men to as being visual creatures who have a simple sexuality, first of all, that does those folks a disservice, because the truth is that human sexuality is in fact a very complex thing that is reliant on a lot of factors, not the least of which are our experiences in childhood and adolescence and the things that we were exposed to and the safety that we feel in our own bodies, the empowerment that we experienced in our first impressions with our sexuality and arousal, and also our empowerment and sense of safety in our own body, but also that this perpetuates rape culture. This is my biggest issue with people reducing sexuality to a binary where men are simple and women are complicated, because we are essentially sending the message that men are simple and thoughtless creatures whose engagement with sex and sexuality is a simple one-for-one equation, right? Except that that's not fucking true. The truth is that, again, human sexuality is complex, and we should be speaking about it in a way that honors that inherent truth, because when we reduce one half of the world to this simple, very base expectation, we give those folks an out to be irresponsible, to be uncaring, to be non-communicative, and to be fucking violent, because they're just simple. It's not their fault, because they're just little simpletons who want to put their dick in things. Wrong. That's fucking harmful. This assertion that human sexuality can be broken in half, one of whom is complex and who needs just a whole lot of work, and the other half who are simple and will stick their dick in a couch for the fun of it, which is not wrong in some circumstances, to be fair, but we should set higher expectations for that half of the world that we're assigning such a low opinion of, because those folks are still, in fact, human beings who are capable of the complexity of human sexuality, but also should be fucking responsible for engaging with their sexuality and their arousal responsibly, safely, in a way that honors the empowerment and the complexity of all of their partners, and also honors the complexity of themselves. Let's set higher fucking expectations for everybody. Hillary. Jesus. I got so angry I fucked up my YouTube.
For most men, but a woman will want to know the whole story. She'll want this sexual tension that builds up between Mrs. Smith and the mailman over several encounters, the dangerous possibility that her husband might come home any minute, the explicit fact that the mailman chose her over all of the other housewives on the street, and so on and so on. A woman would also prefer some kind of story to bind it all together. That's just how women are. If you put explicit sex scenes into a novel-length story, it's going to hit a woman's mind in much the same way the top video on the hub hits a guy.
Can I get a source, please? Can I get, please, tuppence for the birds? A source, please? This is the other issue that I have with this, is that we have set this video up in such a way that we clearly from the outset said we're talking about facts. This is not about her opinion. And yet we've yet to get any kind of tangible source for the claims that she's making about the way that men and women's minds work. This is why I decided to talk about this video, because as a clinician who helps people with their brains, I feel qualified to speak about the way that brains work. And I can assure you, in fact, that when you go to school to be a therapist, you don't have to take two separate courses where they say this is men's brain and these are women's brains. We learn about the human brain, because while, especially socially, we might be exposed to different expectations and different stimuli that impacts the way that our brains work, our brains are in fact under the umbrella of human being. And then we can address the way that society and the world and all of our family, our environment impacts our brains. The gender essentialism in this video is wild and also fucking wrong.
As I said, that's just how women are. A lot of men might hear this and be a little dubious. And in fact, I've found that a lot of men, while they might raise their eyebrows a little at just how explicit women's books have become in recent years, they won't really go as far as to categorize them the same way as, you know, the kind of thing you'd find on the hub. Male writers certainly find such classification baffling, but let me break down how this works for women. If you look at your average popular romantasy book, those books that have dominated book sales for a few years now, and which are among the worst offenders when it comes to wildly explicit content, the explicit scenes coincide with the story to some degree. Now, the authors of these stories will tell you that these sex scenes are there for narrative purposes. They serve either plot development or character development. I don't think that's necessarily true, but let's go with it. Keep in mind what I said about how women engage with erotic content versus how men do. Let's take Sarah J. Maas, for example. I shouldn't have to tell you who she is and why she's relevant to this conversation, but if you don't know, let me just say that she's the woman responsible for the series of books commonly referred to as... Skilled writers such as Maas understand how the story shape of all aspects of storytelling affects reader engagement. We've talked about this before on this channel. Stories, and even their individual components, must have a story shape. That is, at least one character trying to achieve a goal with some kind of opposition to that goal, culminating in a mini climax in which the character achieves success or failure, or some unexpected thing happens. That's a story shape. Maas is actually pretty good at using this story shape to create fairly well-paced, if highly formulaic stories that really draw the reader in. I mean, anyone can...
Why does she seem annoyed about this? Let's be very clear. Sarah J. Maas, Colleen Hoover, a lot of the authors in this niche are peddling some really problematic shit. We're going to talk about that later. So this is not in defense of those people or their fucked up stories. And the weird fixation that this woman seems to have with denigrating the existence of smut, first of all, but also the authors who write that, is odd. I understand not liking something personally, but to say that the existence of it is contributing to the decline of literature as we know it feels a little melodramatic, in my opinion.
Right, smut, but not everyone can sell millions of copies worldwide. Whether or not her stories are good stories, I don't... The point is, she understands how the thing works.
Honestly.
But then she applies the same story shape to her sex scenes. Of course, I shouldn't have to tell you how sex scenes themselves have a story shape. She has stated in many interviews that she endeavors to make sure her sex is plot relevant. A big way she does that is to have the erotic scenes take place at the come down immediately after a major plot mini-climax. This incorporates the emotional release of the narrative with the sexual release of the erotic scene.
I'm so sorry, I'm a child. The amount of times that we've used the word climax and release in this discussion is unnecessary, in my opinion.
She stated that she often tries to make the significant sex scenes, such as that 2 or 3 day sex marathon, occur at the close of equally significant plot arcs. This is ideal for the female brain, which already seeks a story shape even in sexually explicit content. But from a reader engagement plus female adult entertainment perspective, this means that Maas has doubly hooked her female readers. The story and the extremely explicit content have become inextricably linked, and the explicit aspects have been delivered via the story in precisely the most ideal way necessary to capture the infatuation of the female reader. Another interesting thing to note, if you're not yet sold on the fact that all of this so-called women's lit is little more than Four-letter word starts with P, have a look at how much women's fiction has become subject to categorization norms that you don't see outside like the hub or fan fiction, which has become just another form of debauched adult entertainment. Sure, yeah, okay, fan fiction that isn't smut does theoretically exist, I guess, but that's like saying there are non-explicit OnlyFans creators. Within those spheres, the common term used for this categorization is a narrative one or even a literary one. Trope. People talk about tropes all the time. Tropes are fine. There's nothing wrong with them. They're a common tool for literary analysis. A little reductive, a little ridiculously overutilized, but benign in themselves. But the important factor to note here is this. When it comes to women's arousal, they need far more specific things than men do. So a woman's sexual entertainment tastes will always be 1,000 times more specific than a man's. So when a woman seeks out a new book, she'll look for specific cocktails of tropes for that thing she needs to feed her specific hungers. Or, I guess, thirsts. A quick perusal of the book recommendation section of the romance books subreddit will destroy any remaining illusions you might have had that these books are about anything other than sexual arousal. Just take a moment and look at some of these.
Okay, so here's the thing. I have no beef with somebody discussing that the existence of romantasy or the smut genre essentially serves the purpose of arousal for a lot of its readers. I don't know that that is a controversial take, nor is it really necessary to create such a hullabaloo about it. My issue is that we're presenting this as though that's inherently bad. Let's talk about the mental health impact of that. First of all, from a self-care place, the existence of a hobby, an interest, an activity, a pursuit that isn't grounded in productivity or our capitalist hellscape is a good thing. It's a good thing for your brain. Our brains need downtime, they need interest, they need intrigue and things that are outside of our jobs and our responsibilities and our families, etc. So if reading or listening to smut essentially serves the purpose of you having downtime, you doing something for yourself, and you having something that allows your brain to idle down, that's not bad. The other thing about this is that it feels very similar to the way that people shit on graphic novels as being like not real reading, or like to a greater degree, I think the audiobook debate about like audiobooks not being real reading. First of all, I don't know that this is a productive or helpful debate. Who fucking cares? Because again, the purpose of reading is to either educate oneself or to entertain oneself. Smut serves the purpose of entertainment for a lot of people. I'm sure that there's probably a genre of smut that serves to be educational in some regard as well. So regardless, it's serving the purpose that it's intended to. I don't understand the fixation with policing whether or not this counts as like real literature. Who cares? Who cares? It doesn't matter. We're all being fucking policed and hunted to death in a fascist hellscape. So who fucking cares? I find the fixation with this to be fucking useless and also very elitist. It's unnecessary, it's not useful, and it is also very holier than thou.
Can you honestly say that this attitude towards women's fiction has to do with anything other than sex?
No.
I spent a little time while I was researching this subject talking to women and reading the accounts of women who were struggling with the addiction to hardcore content.
Okay.
A solid 90 to 95% of them started with erotic fiction, or smut, as they often called it, and fan fiction. A few stated that they didn't really ever get into videos, often because videos couldn't feed their precise needs. Several mentioned that they had quit the video content only to fall back on erotic fiction, and had happily arrived at the realization that there was functionally no difference between the two. I read an account from one woman who noted that she preferred written smut because within books and fan fiction she was able to find things that would have been illegal in video form. So that's nice. I learned, too, that there was a worryingly large subset of these women, some as young as 17, whose tastes became so depraved so quickly that they were now suffering from something called POCD.
Hold on. This is the other thing about this video that is especially frustrating to me, is that we, again, I want to remind us, we started this video by saying we're discussing facts. We've taken a left turn into the assumption that addiction to this type of content is not just a factual thing, but also apparently a very common thing, which is not true. Let me be very clear. Is it possible for somebody to develop a compulsive behavior related to this type of material? Yes. Is it an addiction in the way that we talk about substance abuse disorders or other clinical addictions? No. The American Psychological Association does not recognize addiction to this type of material as being a diagnosable condition, nor does it endorse the use of that label. A, because it is more so a compulsive behavior than it is a clinical addiction. B, because often the use of this term of like an addiction to explicit material serves as a way for especially high-powered political figures and religious figures to distance themselves and to not take accountability from their interaction with this type of material. And often because that type of material is used as a scapegoat to justify behaviors like abuse and harm to adults and to children, right? We see this being used as a scapegoat to say, it's not my fault, I had an addiction. It's not my fault that I'm a predator, I have an addiction. It's not my fault that I was in an adulterous relationship, I have an addiction. The problem with this is that it emboldens and allows, especially like high control religious groups, for example, to shelter predators and to give those people an excuse for their behavior so that they don't have to take accountability for it. That sucks. Let's not use labels that sound like mental health diagnoses in order to give people an out for being predators and being abusive people. Let's call it what it is. This person has an issue with a compulsive behavior related to sex and sexual material and is therefore not engaging with that material in a healthy way, and that has allowed them or emboldened them to become predatory and abusive. Plain and simple, that's what it is. To use this label, it creates an opening for folks to, again, distance themselves from the accountability of that. And that is a real problem. It's a button. It pushes my fucking buttons as a clinician, because the importance and the use of mental health labels and diagnoses is to get people help. It's to clearly label what is an issue so that we can address it clinically and make progress towards healing and towards reduction of problematic behaviors. That label doesn't serve that purpose.
Several women and teenagers remarked that they wished they had never started reading erotic fiction when they were younger, as they believed it had destroyed their lives. The thing is, just as with people's tastes in hardcore video subgenres, these tastes, these hungers, will intensify over time. The same mechanic is at play as you see in men who have to constantly seek harder and harder filmed content in order to even be aroused.
Hi. Editing Mickey here really quick. When we recorded this initially, obviously, I was mad and my brain short-circuited. So I forgot to address this situation. We actually just made a video about OCD on the channel. I will put it in the thing. If you're not aware, you haven't watched it, please go watch it. It's very informational. But this pissed me the fuck off. This is so fucking stupid. Like, I'm so sorry. I've tried really hard to be as respectful as possible throughout this video, but this shit's fucking stupid. So essentially what this woman is referring to is a subtype of OCD in which folks develop compulsive behaviors in response to an obsessive fear that they might be a person who seeks to harm children in an explicit way. I'm trying really hard not to use the word for obvious reasons, but the thing about this that I wanted to point out, first of all, we're conflating these things as though having this OCD diagnosis means that somebody is that word, which is fucking wrong. Let's be very clear about that. We talked about this in the OCD video. If you're not aware, the reason that OCD is a fucking disorder in the first place is because you suffer from intrusive thoughts that intrude, in fact, into your mind in an ego-dystonic way. For folks who went to school of life and don't know what that means, ego-dystonic means that they are opposite of what your actual intent and want is. That's why they're fucking distressing. That's why OCD is such a fucking debilitating disorder to have, because you're constantly being plagued with these thoughts, these intrusive images, these fears that what if I am a person who seeks to harm people? What if I'm secretly a terrible person, or that P word and I just don't know it, or I've hidden it from myself, or I do really think that, but I don't really want to be honest with myself about that. And so that's why I'm a terrible person. This can happen in such an intense way that we sometimes create unwanted groinal responses as a consequence of these intrusive thoughts. This is another way that folks become stuck in this loop, because our fear about being that person causes our blood pressure and our heart rate to rise. And because we are focused on a particular area of our body, notably our genitals, we can experience an unwanted groinal response, which then further cements this thought and this fear and this cycle of like, oh my God, no, I am this person, right? Let's be very clear. Folks who suffer from POCD are not that word. Folks who suffer from POCD have obsessive fears about being that person, so much so that they develop compulsive behaviors in an attempt to try to deal with that. So the fact that we're using the escalating interest in explicit material, in explicit written or video material as justification for saying that your escalated interest in this genre caused you to develop POCD, which therefore makes you that word. That's fucking ridiculous. That's actually the fucking opposite. That's the opposite of what that fucking diagnosis means. If you have that diagnosis, that means you're not that person. That's literally the fucking point. That's literally the fucking point of the diagnosis. And this is why it makes me so fucking mad when people get on the internet and fucking about things that they don't know what it means. Because first of all, you're fucking wrong. First of all, that's fucking wrong. But second of all, you're actively harming people who have POCD by conflating the two. You're actively participating in further cementing the obsessive and fearful belief that folks have that they're a fucking terrible human being, even though they are not, by trying to stand on this soapbox about how much you hate smut. And listen, if you're a person who doesn't like smut, you don't like the existence of this particular genre, I've said this a million times in this video, that's fine. I'm not saying that you guys should, I don't really like Colleen Hoover and I don't get it. It's not for me. It's not really my thing. But that doesn't mean that I think it should be eradicated from existence, nor do I think that we should get on the internet and diarrhea out of our mouths about how that genre is causing people to become that P word. Because is it possible that that's happening? Sure. Is it likely? No. And certainly people developing POCD as a result of their engagement with this type of material does not mean that those people are that word. It also does not mean that folks developed POCD because of their interest or engagement with that material, because that's not how it fucking works. You can't catch it, Hillary. It's not the flu. That's not how fucking genetic disorders work. It is a neurodivergency. You can literally see it in the physiological images of somebody's fucking brain. It's in here. It's in here. That's how your fucking brain, it's so asinine and honestly so fucking embarrassing. If somebody has these like very reductive and oppressive and backwards beliefs about the existence of material to which people flick the bean, then you know what? Like, just say that. Just say, I don't think you should touch yourself. And like, I don't agree with that. I think that's silly. I think that's a silly goose thing to say. But if you think that, just say that. But instead, we got on the internet and we use this opportunity as this like soapbox from which to preach about how this material causes people to develop a physiological difference in their brain that's likely genetic, by the way. Let's be very clear. There are certain things that can become a catalyst or can worsen the symptoms of that disorder, right? This is why I tell people all the time on this channel to be very careful about your engagement with like religion, for example, because scrupulosity is a type of OCD that you can develop when being exposed to a very like rules-oriented and high control environment. So if you know you have that diagnosis or you know that you're predisposed to potentially develop that diagnosis, be very mindful about your engagement with those things. But one thing we do know is that reading explicit content does not cause you to develop OCD, least of all POCD. So the fact that we just like sip out of your coffee mug talking about something else. Like, do your little another time about any fucking thing else, because this is the most ridiculous ass, wrong ass, embarrassing ass fucking take about mental health. Like, I was flabbergasted reviewing the footage of this because I was like, this woman did not just get on the internet and actually get a little gotcha. Guess what? Got you. You're wrong. You're wrong, Queen, and I'm so sorry. I hate to be the one to tell you this, but you're fucking wrong. And also, you put your ass in the street. You put your ass in the street. This is embarrassing for you, for your heart and soul, and also it's fucking hateful. It's hateful. Please stop fucking doing shit like this. Again, it's one thing to say, I don't like this. Great, don't like it. Do not get on the fucking internet. Anybody, do not get on the fucking internet and use things that you don't know, that you do not have the first concept about what it means, and actively then accidentally harm mentally ill people. People who suffer from OCD, it is the most overwhelming and isolating disorder when you feel like you're a fucking awful human being. And here we are, fucking from the school of Germany life, heaping trauma and shame upon people who are already suffering. Please look elsewhere, Queen. Do something else. Talk about something else. Talk about anything else besides this. Because woo! Anyways, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to let you guys watch the rest of the video. Spoiler, it's also angry. Whatever. Moving on. This is the other thing. We're now conflating an interest or a use of smut or romantasy as a gateway to addiction, that we're having this conversation with the implied assumption that if you engage or use this type of material that you will therefore become an addict, that it's an on-ramp, right? When that's not the truth. Lots of people recreationally use substances, and I'm not endorsing that, to be clear, but lots of people recreationally use substances and don't develop a substance abuse disorder. Obviously, we know that there are certain substances that make you much more likely to develop a substance abuse disorder, and so we should not use those, right? As a caveat, don't do that. And to say that this type of material is the same as a highly addictive substance, for example, is not only not true, it also creates an unnecessary fear-mongering around the thing that drives people to want it more. This is the problem with setting up this fixation with purity culture and with modesty, is that it creates an unnecessary and fervent, a feverish interest in this. The truth is that human sexuality is an innate part of a lot of people's lives. Not all people's lives, to be clear, but a lot of folks find sex, pleasure, arousal to just be a thing that they are innately interested in. That's not bad. But to put it in this little corner where we say there's all of these things, these conditions that you have to meet before you're allowed to open the box, makes us fascinated with the box. I want to open it. I want to know what's in the box, right? The issue is that if we had a responsible attitude about it culturally and said, yes, this is a thing, it exists, it's something that we should engage with responsibly and safely and with a set of clear and healthy boundaries, but it's something that you're able to access at a time that is safe for you to do that, right? Then we can have an open and honest conversation about it, allow people to develop their interest in this in an empowered and in a safe way, again, prioritizing healthy boundaries and healthy behaviors around it. But when we put it in this little box and we tell people, it creates a fascination with it. Please stop fucking doing this. When we do the thing where we're like, oh, don't touch it, don't touch the thing, because you're going to get addicted, all it does is make people fucking want to touch it more, especially people who already have a compulsive behavior related to this type of material.
For that reason, more and more women's fiction has been including very, very dark material, be it disturbing age gaps, torture, abuse.
Okay, this is the other thing that really pushes my fucking buttons. Let's have a conversation about the difference between fantasy and this type of material and our actual interest in engaging in those behaviors in real life. It is very common, in case you didn't know, it is very common and very normal for people to have an interest in consuming content that is related to taboo topics, but not want to enact that in real life. Now, let me be very fucking clear. That's not related to the thing that I know a lot of you are fucking thinking about, a desire to harm especially minors. That's not included in this category. That's not what we're talking about. But for example, plenty of people might have an interest in reading about golden showers, but not actually want to get pissed on. That's fine. That's part of the joy of fantasy, I guess. We are allowed as people to read about or to consume content that speaks about or describes certain kinks or fetishes. Again, a kink and a fetish, or a kink or a fetish, is only content where, folks can engage in that willingly and with consent and all of those things, including consensual non-consent, by the way. Having an interest in those types of things does not make you a depraved or disgusting human being. Especially, let's talk about consensual non-consent, actually, for what it's worth. CNC is something that's a very common kink For lots of folks, especially those of us that grew up with a shame and a fear around sex and sexuality, because it allows somebody to engage in the fantasy of being sexual, especially like wild and crazy and passionate sex, without having to feel the shame that often accompanies a desire for sex. If you grew up being told you shouldn't like sex, then CNC in a fantasy realm can serve the purpose of you getting to be sexual without feeling the shame and the judgment of like, it's bad that I want sex, right? It's very common for a lot of folks. That doesn't make you depraved or disgusting, and it also does not mean that you have a desire to be harmed or to harm other people. This is the thing too, where like, I am not a literature expert, and so I'm not going to get on YouTube and critique this woman's book and say that I don't like the writing or I think this is bad. I don't know dick all about writing or about storyline, so I'm not going to do that. So I would appreciate if people who are not educated about brains and about psychology and about human sexuality don't speak on that prescriptively if you don't know what you're talking about. I feel that that is a fair ask. You know, I think a lot of people would feel justified in saying, don't put your ass in the street if you don't know what you're talking about.
Start out wanting fantasy fiction. That's something that happens over time as they become desensitized to more mainstream content. I don't know how many videos and reviews I've seen by very young teenage girls who say the explicit sex in Sarah J. Maas's books is very mediocre and vanilla. That would be because they're already desensitized and crave harder content. Honestly, though, by now I should have convinced you that these books are merely mass-produced hardcore adult entertainment and that their readership consumes them in much the same way one would consume any other form of, four-letter word starts with P, and that the result of that consumption, especially on a large enough scale and on a long enough timeline, is pretty much the same as any other form of hardcore entertainment addiction. So let's move on. Now, let's assume that you can get someone to concede that, yes, this is all, a written form of the same kind of crap you'd find on the hub. At that point, what happens is someone will insist that this is somehow the ethical type of adult entertainment. We'll get to that. Or they'll start trying to argue that this kind of written explicit content has positive effects. I've heard all these arguments. I've heard people say that the heavy amount of sex in these books creates some kind of sex-positive environment for female empowerment. I've heard people say that books like these increase readers' empathy. I've also, as I've said, been told that objecting to literature like this is inherently anti-women. First of all, let's talk about empathy and the chemical reaction romance novels have.
Please, if you hold on to your butts, because this section sent me into orbit.
On the female brain. There are so few studies that have been done on adult film's impact on women and almost zero studies that have been done on erotic literature's impact on women. This is one of the most criminally understudied areas in human existence.
Sure.
Something I hear all the time is that romance novels increase the reader's empathy. I doubt it's that simple, but let's say it is. Okay. Women are empathetic by default. That is not something...
Jesus Christ with the gender essentialism.
That romance literature gives women. It heightens it, certainly, but as in all emotions, a heightened state of anything is usually very bad. Heightened empathy reduces a person's logical response and cognitive reasoning. It makes it difficult to regulate the emotional response with reason. Heightened states of empathy have been found to contribute to pain, depression, anxiety, emotional overinvolvement, burnout, vicarious trauma, and post-traumatic stress disorder.
This is so fucking ridiculous. Okay, couple of things. First of all, the assertion that a heightened state of anything is bad, hello? That's not necessarily true. Second of all, the take that empathy increases mental illness, this is based, first of all, on causal assumptions that we don't have any proof for. If you've been on this channel for any length of time, you will know that I am so fucking annoying about the way that we should critically look at and consume research. For example, there's a very big difference between a causal link and an association. And the study that she just referenced, I looked it up. It identifies that there is an association between heightened states of empathy and all of the things that she just mentioned, right? That is not a causal link. That's not to say that we found definitive research to prove that heightened empathy causes you to have mental illness or to have burnout, any of the other things. First of all, even if that is true, right? Let's give Hillary the benefit of the doubt and say that even if that is true, that heightened empathy causes all of these things, which again, we have no proof of, If that were true, we did not at all, in this study or any of the other things that I could find related to this topic, did not at all address the role that things like healthy boundaries, access to healthcare or mental health care, that our coping strategies, that our social support have on our development of things like mental illness, burnout, etc. The problem, this is my main problem with this assertion. First of all, it's an association and not a causal link. But second of all, we run with that information to mean that heightened empathy means mental illness, but we're not at all evaluating the environment, which is a key factor in a lot of people's likelihood to develop mental illness or burnout or any of the other negative side effects that have been listed as a result of heightened empathy. One of the other things about this study is that it's cited in reference to healthcare workers and mental health care workers, both of which are populations that are notorious for having terrible boundaries, for being overworked and underpaid, and for not at all having the appropriate access to all of the social and environmental support that is often a protective factor in our potential development of mental illness and burnout, etc. The other thing with this assumption is that empathy, which is a core feature of being a human being, by the way, it's also an integral part of our development in relationships or our development socially. We need empathy in order to fucking function in the world. Our assertion in this research is that empathy does in fact result in us having feelings. Yes, water is wet, but this is the thing. Towels help us dry off, babe. So the problem is not that we're having the feelings, but that we have no recourse for dealing with the feelings once they have come about. This is so cuckoo bananas as an assertion that heightened empathy, which apparently we're establishing that these novels bring about heightened empathy, which means that you're more likely to develop mental illness and burnout and negative emotions, and so therefore we should avoid the romance. Instead of the take being like, wow, isn't it crazy that living in a capitalist fascist police state where we have no access to healthcare, to community support, where our social interactions are continuing to shrink and be less and less meaningful because we're all being worked to death, and that we don't have access to all of the things like healthy coping, healthy boundaries, and any of the other environmental supports that promote our mental health, causes us to develop mental illness and burnout and negative feelings and all different types of things that are awful for our fucking brains. Instead of that take, it's romantasy is making you mentally ill. Please be so fucking for real. This is the other thing. One of my other biggest issues with this is that this take is coming out of the mouth of a woman who openly acknowledges on her own website in her about section that she does not have a college degree to rub between her two sticky little fingers. She actually talks about how instead of going to college, she chose to be a learner from the world. She went to the land of her people, which is Germany, apparently, and decided to educate herself about literature and writing and whatever. And listen, I don't take issue with that. That's fine. Great. That's awesome for you. And it does not provide you with a pulpit from which to preach about people's mental health or the impact of different types of literature on their brains, because you don't have the appropriate background information, nor are you using the research at your disposal responsibly to speak about the phenomenon that you're insisting is factual when it is in fact not factual, nor is it well supported in any of the research. It boggles my mind. Here's the other thing. If this woman says that romantasy is bullshit ass fucking literature and I think it's stupid, or I think that this genre is limiting our access to well-written literature and media, and it's a damn shame that it's flooding the market and that people aren't being encouraged to consume books and literature and writing that is more emotionally complex and that drives us to think more critically and that creates a greater emotional experience. Sure, honestly, I don't even disagree with that take. Fair enough. I think the capitalism of it all, meaning that when one person is wildly successful with a type of book, that every Tom, Dick, or Harry with a fucking laptop starts writing a book like that and tries to get it published, is a shame. That sucks. It sucks that living in a capitalist hellscape means that media, right, film, music, literature becomes flooded with the things that make money rather than with the things that are thought-provoking, that push us to be critical thinkers, and that, all the things, right? That is sad. I think that fucking sucks. And so that would be a fair take, in my opinion. Say that. But to use this sort of weird rabbit trail where we're implying that romantasy causes you to be mentally ill, and it's especially dangerous for women because women just have a lot of empathy and it just makes them very empathetic. This is a garbage ass fucking take. This is a garbage ass fucking take, and I just wish if somebody wants to critique the genre of romantasy, great. Go ahead. I don't have any issue with that because, again, I'm not a writer. That's none of my goddamn business. But I wish that people would do it from a place of authority in their own lane. I don't think that that is difficult to do, but also an unrealistic or unfair ask. I do also want to pause here to point out that we took this bad faith assumption that increased empathy causes mental illness and ran downhill with this to imply that increased empathy is like a floodgate that can't be closed. That's not how emotions work. I feel confident in speaking about this with authority. Emotions are, in fact, visitors. They are temporary states of being, and this is the central work that a lot of therapists are doing with folks who are struggling with mental illness, for example, with dysregulated emotions, with trauma. Our ability to be in presence with our emotions, to let them live in our bodies, to acknowledge them, to process them, and then let them go is the central feature through which we heal things like trauma and emotional dysregulation and mental illness. So to say increased empathy is, or to imply rather, that increased empathy is like a floodgate that cannot be closed is not just wrong, it's also a bad faith argument to posit that increased empathy is a bad thing. This is such a Ben Shapiro, Ally B. Stuckey ass fucking take. It's also grounded in this weird gender essentialist assumption that women and their irrational girly feelings mean that they are being uniquely victimized and traumatized by this genre. I also want to point out here that we took this, I doubt that empathy or that it's this simple, right? Like 5 seconds ago, she just said, I doubt that it's that simple that romance novels increase your empathy, and then ran downhill with it to take that assumption as fact somehow. Like we rolled our eyes at this 5 seconds ago, but now we're using it as the basis to assert that romance novels are making you mentally ill. Which is it? Which is it? Pick a lane.
Right out of the gate, the fact that romance books heighten empathy in readers is proof.
5 seconds ago, we rolled our eyes at it and said it's not that simple, but now it's a fact.
That despite the intentions of the writers, these books arouse readers, whether they want to be aroused or not, which is an unsettling thought all by itself. So imagine you're a young woman and you're reading a steamy romance in which the main female character is being mistreated in some way by the male character, and this female character feels arousal at this mistreatment. Written well, this arousal on the part of the female character will trigger empathetic arousal in the female reader. A young, inexperienced woman will then be troubled trying to understand why she's feeling aroused by what is borderline abusive behavior.
First of all, I'm not familiar with the genre of books or audiobooks that tape your fucking eyelids open or disable the pause button on your fucking phone while you're reading the thing. If anybody, I want to talk to that person because I would love to be able to have people not pause my videos, but that's not a thing. That doesn't work. This assumption or this like assertion that people are being aroused against their will, non-consensually by media that they're choosing to engage with is a wild one. But also, this is predicated on the false premise that folks are haplessly wandering into smut with no idea of what they're walking into. And don't get me wrong, some of the covers of these books, a little bit ambiguous, right? But there are quite a few of them that I find really hard to believe. I literally looked at Goodreads and like the top smut books in that category. And a lot of them, I'll show you some of them. They're pretty fucking obvious. I doubt that anybody is looking at some of these books and being like, wow, it looks like such a wholesome story. Let me give this to my 8-year-old. No one's fucking doing that. And listen, in fairness, I do agree that a lot of the books in this genre are perpetuating really harmful norms. We talked about this when we talked about Colleen Hoover. It's really fucking bothersome to me that we're elevating these stories about like essentially an abusive relationship and normalizing the existence of that as something that is arousing and interesting. That sucks. That sucks. It's not done in such a way that we're acknowledging the harm or acknowledging that, you know, this person is aroused by being in an abusive relationship and that that's a bad thing. We're basically just writing it into these stories as a thing that's like totally normal. It's a very 50 Shades of Grey, Twilight sort of thing. But for those of us that are grown-ups now, that sucks. Let's not do that. So don't misunderstand me when I say that this is a frustrating take from this person, because I do agree, honestly, that normalizing that type of relationship is bad. And I think the demo of naive young woman who's looking for a wholesome book at Barnes & Noble and just happens to wander into the smut section and is also too naive or too stupid to put it down is a fairly small one. I would assume that we don't need to make assertions about the future of this genre based on what is actually probably a small demo. And again, I want to point out that we can have conversations about how problematic it is to normalize abusive relationships in this way without saying that people reading sexually arousing material is inherently a bad thing, right? People enjoying smut and people enjoying the normalization of abusive relationships, it's a Venn diagram, but there are people on either side of the intersecting sections. Like, let's be very clear about that.
However, the story will continue in this vein until the man and woman are living happily ever after. The moment of joy at the end is the emotional climax that is essential for a woman to fully enjoy an erotic romance. And no, I'm not saying women are super weak or something like that, but I think we can all agree that strong emotions are exhausting no matter who you are, and women are more prone to feel emotions strongly. And
can I get a source, please? Can I please? Again.
Empathetic response to a romance book will result in an emotional roller coaster designed specifically to ensnare the tastes of women in such a way that their emotional involvement in a story will tend to be more intensive than a man's on average. Add to that the sexual infatuation triggered by the addictive erotic release of the extremely explicit scenes, which also takes a toll on the mind, whether you enjoy these scenes or not, especially if you do. I don't really understand why more people aren't aware of how intensely bad these books are for women's minds.
Because all of the things that you're saying are not true. Because almost all of the points that you've made in support of your position, which is that smut is bad and should go away, are not factual. Like, can I get a source, please? A source on aisle 69 for me, please? Because I just don't understand why we're continuing to speak with such authority about a topic that is propped up on a series of bad faith arguments and non-factual material.
I did read quite a few of these books when I was trying to understand the genre better. And something that really surprised me was how huge of an emotional impact they had on me. Despite the fact that I didn't care about these characters, and despite the fact that they were all mostly happy endings and everything else, I was legitimately depressed during the few weeks when I was reading these books. I was having trouble focusing on my work. I was having trouble sleeping. I was even having trouble eating. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong until it dawned on me that my mind was basically being ripped around a female-specific roller coaster that was designed to trigger the most extreme emotional and chemical reaction in my mind, short of actually doing drugs.
Comparing erotica to drugs is a wild take. First of all, let's not give people like Colleen Hoover and Sarah J. Maas that much credit. They're not chemical masterminds who are sitting in their little laboratories cooking up ways to manipulate the minds of young women so that they become addicted to their books and can't put them down. They're just writers, and they're very aware that sex sells. That's not new. That's also not a new thing. Also, the assertion that this is, again, like an addiction, not true. Is it possible for people to develop compulsive behaviors related to sexual material? Yes. Is it a clinical addiction? No.
Interestingly, the reaction I experienced was the same reaction men talk about when they watch filmed explicit content. The depression, the difficulty focusing, the lethargy. Women who are addicted to this sexually explicit fiction don't even realize that they're literally addicted to, adult entertainment.
Says who? Where are you getting this fucking information? Also, again, we've talked about this ad nauseum on the channel. Anecdotal data does not prop up a statement that is meant to be factual. Anecdotal data is not research.
Without exception, men who are addicted to watching explicit content are viewed as bad. I shouldn't have to tell anyone watching this video how bad that is for the mind. It just happens that all the language surrounding this accepted fact says men's minds, how bad it is for men, how much damage it does to men. There have been countless studies done on the negative impact watching this stuff has on men's physical health and mental health, on their relationships, friendships, professional lives, and on their character. But basically 0 such studies have been done on women. Part of this is because most researchers won't acknowledge that women's addiction to erotic fiction is in any way comparable to a man's addiction to filmed erotic media.
First of all, it's not an addiction, again. But second of all, the gap in research is a product of misogyny. It's a product of our society's fixation and centering of male pleasure. The gap in that research is not because we don't care about the addictions that women or AFAB people have. It's because our society is fixated with centering the pleasure and the sexual arousal of men and leave everybody else who doesn't identify as a cisgender heterosexual man out in the cold. The problem with this is that there is very much a need to address the compulsive behavior that is related to the overconsumption of erotic material generally, and the answer is not in demonizing the existence of the material, but in addressing the misogyny that is inherent in our scientific community, especially because so many of the folks who go on to conduct this research are fucking men, because we don't encourage or allow or uplift people who don't identify as cisgender heterosexual men to pursue careers in science and research and all of the things that give you the information and the professional experience necessary to write papers and conduct research related to this topic. There's layers. There's many layers to this, none of which are let's kick all of the people who write smut out into the ether.
Part of it is because there's so much feminist armor packed around women's erotica that even if a woman were to watch the hub 10 hours a day, she would still somehow be protected by the fact that she's like empowering herself or, I don't know, exploring her sexuality. For social political reasons, most people won't touch that with a 10-foot pole.
What does that mean?
When it comes to men, this kind of content is known to have an enormous negative impact on their daily lives. Therefore, there are countless resources out there to help men kick that habit and restore sanity to their lives.
Sanity.
There's also a lot of shame among men. Men will mock other men for their addiction to this stuff. But for women, nothing. There are no resources to help women kick their addiction to erotic literature, at least none that I could find. And any woman who feels shame when reading this stuff is said to be suffering from internalized misogyny and is advised to focus on overcoming the stigma by, reading more of these books. Other women will help her in this endeavor. To this end, there are romance book clubs with completely expected names in which the pursuit of women's fiction can be enjoyed without shame.
Which is bad. This is why I'm so annoyed by this entire video, because it's basically a very long and pretentious way to peddle her opinion, which is that erotica or adult entertainment material aimed at AFAB people is inherently bad and filled with degeneracy, which is not true. Again, let's be very clear that folks who are choosing to pursue a hobby, which is reading, by consuming material, the type of book that they want to read, is not an inherently bad thing. Is it possible for people to develop an unhealthy relationship with that material? Yes, of course. Is that evidence that the entire genre should get thrown out? No. I
read one account from a young woman who said that when she realized she was addicted, she sought help from a therapist who treated the matter as if it was nothing serious at all. No different from, like, a chocolate addiction.
That's also not a thing.
Appreciation of erotic literature is presented to women as female empowerment and whatever various other hot words are part of the current feminist lexicon. If a woman were to express discomfort with the proliferation and increasing intensity of sexually explicit material in women's fiction, she is painted as an enemy, a prude, or, my personal favorite, a slave to the patriarchy. They'll say it allows women to explore their sexuality in a safe space. I'm pretty sure you could also say that men on the hub are exploring their sexuality in a safe space. I don't know. To which women will often argue, well, that kind of content, the stuff on the hub, is unethical. But that erotic literature, if they even concede that it's the same kind of content, is somehow ethical, meaning that, I'm assuming, no actors or actresses were harmed in its making. Be that as it may, the making of the explicit content is a separate issue from its consumption. I'm sure you could find an ethical and environmentally friendly way to make heroin, wouldn't make it a good thing for me to consume it.
What in the Paul and Morgan is fucking going on right now? You cannot convince me that this isn't intended to be covert propaganda for this woman's conservative political beliefs. This is the most ridiculous fucking thing to say. We basically acknowledge that the existence of written erotica does circumvent the issue with video material that is often a fucking issue. It's a rampant problem, actually. We acknowledge that consuming the written type of this material that's created by somebody who's like consenting to do this, they are empowered and feel okay and whatever, all the things, that it doesn't matter. Oh well, doesn't matter. The problem is that it exists, though. Did you ever think about the fact that maybe we could make heroin ethically? No, because this isn't heroin, because it's not an abusive or addictive material, rather, that is as addictive as one of the most notoriously addictive physical substances. This is the most ridiculous conflation. This is how you know that somebody is engaging in a bad faith argument. Also, I want to point out that we essentially said, like, sure, right, maybe we're making this ethically, but still people are consuming it, which is inherently bad. Is it? Why? Again, I want to be clear. I'm not the biggest fan of this genre. I'm not saying that everyone go out and read fucking Colleen Hoover's books. In fact, don't read her fucking books, because they suck and they're, platforming abusive relationships. Go read something else. I don't know. Read some fan fiction or something. There's plenty of interesting and thought-provoking literature that also includes arousing material, and doing so doesn't make you an inherently bad person who's on the fucking on-ramp to developing an addiction. That's not real.
A lot of people these days talk about how social bias prevented women from enjoying romance literature. Well, now the social moral landscape has shifted again. If you're a woman and you're not a proud champion of smut, then you're the enemy of women. In general, though, I think the so-called social bias surrounding romance novels isn't much different from the bias surrounding all commercial fiction. I also don't think that's done that much to stop women from mass-consuming romance novels. Champions of romance novels will present the acceptance of smut as crucial to female empowerment and independence. This is categorically false, and in fact, I think I've shown how the opposite is true.
Have you?
But women will nevertheless be banished from female society by other women if they dare to disagree.
No one's getting banished anywhere. Also, to where? What are you talking about? Did you get voted out of your book club because you didn't want to read smut? Is that what's happening? It's giving sour grapes. This is giving, I don't like smut and I feel weird that other people like it and I'm mad that people don't agree with me. Which, you know what? Fair. But make a YouTube video about that. Just say that. We don't need to put all of these, pseudo-scientific assertions into a video to try and prove your point. This reminds me of the way, we talked about this on the channel extensively, that I am so frustrated with the way that our social media trends have evolved to use clinical diagnoses and clinical language to look down our noses at people. Quit calling people narcissists. Unless you're actually their therapist and you know that they're a narcissist and they're okay with you saying you're a narcissist, don't do that. Stop doing that. Don't call people narcissists. Don't use clinical diagnoses to shame and judge other people. You can just say that person's an asshole. That person's super selfish. That person was abusive to me. That person fucking sucks. That person can suck eggs. Say that. Say anything other than that, because your feelings, your personal experiences, your existence, your subjective data is a valid enough reason to say, I don't fucking like that person. I think that person's fucking bad news. Say that. You can say that. But the thing is that when we fall back on this weird elitist fake science to say that something is bad or I don't like it, first of all, you're invalidating your own argument. But second of all, we're proliferating the existence of this phenomenon, and I just want it to go away. I just want this to go away. I really want to empower people in being comfortable to say, I just don't fucking like it. It makes me fucking uncomfortable. I think that everybody's fixation with smut is super weird. Again, say that. Just say that. You're allowed to just say that.
Men typically who watch hardcore stuff or who are addicted to it are ashamed of it. Women who are addicted to reading, as they call it, smut, are supposed to be proud of it. None of these women will allow any talk of shame. But here's the thing. Shame is not a bad thing. Shame is how our brains tell us we're doing something that will harm us. If we feel shame eating that 4th slice of triple chocolate cake in one sitting, that's our brain telling us that this is bad for our health.
I'm gonna fucking rip my eyelashes off one at a time. First of all, can I get my street cred for not fucking exploding? Because this is fucking wild. But second of all, that's not fucking true. This is why I fucking hate it when people who aren't educated about mental health or about the brain even talk about mental health and the brain. Shame is not a fucking good thing. Shame is a bad thing. Maybe you didn't learn that in your school of Germanic life, Hillary, but that's not fucking true. That is not how shame works at all. Let's be very clear. Shame is an unhealthy and societally programmed response to societally shamed and judged behaviors. We feel shame because we're told that we should. Guilt is when we do something that is bad that violates either our moral code or the socially agreed upon moral code. Guilt tells us I did a bad thing. Guilt allows us to say, I did a bad thing. How can I make amends for this thing? How can I put into place a procedure so that I don't fucking do a bad thing again? And how can I use this experience to learn and grow as a person? Shame tells us you're a piece of shit and you suck and that's awful. That's not fucking productive. Besides the fact that it doesn't actually fucking teach us anything, it doesn't help you with anything, it's not fucking productive. It's so fucking unhealthy and also fucking abusive to perpetuate the idea that shame is a thing that we should all feel because we ate chocolate cake also. What the fuck? Eat your cake. Everybody just eat whatever cake you want to eat. Eat fucking bread, eat pizza, eat whatever the fuck you want because it doesn't fucking matter. This is what I'm fucking talking about. Shame is a thing that we feel because we've been told to. And if you feel uncomfortable, for example, if your body is like, ooh, that's gonna be diarrhea, that's probably a message from your body that you did a thing to or for your body probably wasn't a good idea. When I feel the rumbly tummies because I ate lactose and I fucking know that I shouldn't have, that's my body sending me a message. And so I can say, what should I do with this information moving forward? Am I gonna stop eating lactose? No, but that's not something that I should be ashamed of. The thing is that it's something that we can use. It's an experience that we can use to educate ourselves and to grow as a person moving forward. To be ashamed of it is to say that you are an irreparably fucking bad person who does not deserve good things and who is irredeemable. Being irredeemable makes you feel like shit, first of all, and also keeps you stuck. What's the point of feeling something bad if you can't come back from there? If I feel that I am inherently fucking bad, shitty, awful, not ever going to grow, I'm just gonna sit in the dark, honestly. Like, if I feel that I can't improve from here, what's my fucking incentive to do anything better? Because I am broken. If I'm a broken person, okay, then I'm just gonna keep doing broken shit. But if we tell people, no, that's not true. You're a good person. You're a valuable person. You matter. You're somebody who has an inherent worthiness and a deserving of belonging. And this thing that you did, not good. Don't do that. You did something hurtful or you said something shitty. So we should learn from this experience. Teaching people that they have value and that they matter positions us to then learn from the shitty things that we do. So if we, for example, develop an addiction, if we develop a compulsive behavior with material that harms us or that causes us to have mental illness related to that thing, we can tell someone, you're a good person, you are worthy, you're belonging, you matter, and this is not great. That's not great. It's harming your mind. It's creating a disturbance in your daily life. You have like essentially clinically significant symptoms that do very much need addressing because you matter, because you're valuable, because you deserve to be happy. And it's important that you exist and exist in a way that's thriving rather than surviving. So let's have a very honest and frank conversation about the way that you're engaging with this material because it's not good, right? See how those are different? See how those are very different? It's not a complex issue, first of all, but it also it vexes me when people talk about this in a way that's so fucking uneducated. Does she not know who Brene Brown is? Google it. Oh!
If we feel shame because we haven't exercised in over 6 months, that's our brain telling us that we need physical exercise of some kind.
That's not true.
If we feel shame when we take in hardcore explicit material, that's our brain telling us that this is going to harm us in some way and we need to stop.
That's you experiencing the societally imposed judgment and shame that you've been told that you should feel, which, by the fucking way, disproportionately affects people who aren't assigned the label of male at birth. The problem with this is that we're continuing to heap shame and judgment on people who, sure, are there people who are developing a compulsive behavior related to smut? Sure, but we should be positioning ourselves to educate those folks because often it's a byproduct of not understanding how to engage with explicit material because they're seeking a sense of empowerment. They're seeking a sense of understanding of their arousal, of their sexuality, of their pleasure. So let's talk about how this is not good. Right? The compulsive behavior, not helpful. But here are other outlets for you to discover what it means to be in your empowerment, to experience pleasure, to grow in your identity and your safety in your body and in your relationships. Let's educate people. This is why I'm a big fan of Beducated, because they have reliable and fact-based material to teach people how to safely engage with their own sexuality and pleasure. There are also actually courses on there about how to safely engage with explicit material. If we educate people about how to do this safely without shaming them, people overall are going to experience a greater sense of satisfaction, first of all, but also we're going to decrease the odds that they're going to experience negative things related to their consumption of that material. We're doing it backwards.
This is our brain trying to save us. Eventually, anyone can be desensitized to shame, but the effort to desensitize women to shame has been a lot more intensive than it has been for men, because historically, women have led the charge against indecent or sexually explicit material. So shame in women cuts into hardcore film producers and women's lit publishers' bottom line. Removing shame from women's minds doesn't just prevent them from bullying hardcore erotica production out of the mainstream, it mobilizes 50% of the spending force of the book market to obsessively consume something that is dangerously addictive. This is a huge reason why it's becoming increasingly common for harder and harder content in books to be made available to a younger and younger audience, especially a young female audience. You see incredibly steamy makeout scenes in books marketed to 12-year-old girls. Caraval, for example, has 2 prolonged passages that read like weird hand fetish scenes. This isn't some kind of accidental slip of the pen. This is intentional.
Says who? Where are you getting this information from?
The reality is, however, that no matter what the writers thought, the publishers knew that a little sprinkling of sex would let them mention it in the publicity, and that would boost sales. After a few generations cycle through this system, using sex to sell an otherwise mediocre or even terrible book is not even something that's questioned. For that matter, using sex to sell an excellent book isn't even questioned. Eventually, you reach a point where sex is the main point of the book. What I'm trying to say here is that the current year situation did not arise entirely out of thin air. Like, the second women started to dominate literature, everything became smut. I would concede that everything has become women-centric smut, or you could say smut written for women by women. But this issue, this almost virulent proliferation of smut, as it were, in literature has been a thing for a long time. The main difference is that previously some books were written by men and some by women. On top of that, the overall quality used to be higher, so the sex didn't really stand out, nor were the publishers leaning as heavily on the explicit content to sell the books, given that the books and the authors were generally of a higher quality in and of themselves. I can't read the minds of the women who wrote articles like these ones, but I'd guess that a major complaint a lot of these women really had when it came right down to it was that the sex written by the men didn't really appeal to them.
Which is bad. First of all, what an incredibly long and convoluted way to say that I'm annoyed that sex has to be a part of all books, which is really saying something coming from me. First of all, the assertion that the rise of the Romantasy genre means that sex must be in all books and therefore is proof of the degeneracy of modern literature is a wild take, and also wrong, because she actually talks about how previously this was a thing that was incorporated in a lot of popular books. Just because Jaws had tits on the cover doesn't mean that Romantasy is therefore the downfall of modern literature. It also, again, we talked about this earlier, this is not a new concept. Sex is a very common part of a lot of media, both because it's fucking interesting, but also because people generally are just fascinated by the concept of sex. I would argue that a lot of that has to do with especially America's puritanical origins and our obsession with moderating our access to things like sex and arousal. We are so fucking obsessed with telling people you can only do it this way, you can only have it this way, it only is good if you do X, Y, and Z things first. And it creates a fixation. We've talked about this on the channel before. We've talked about it before. This was the same. We talked about it in the video that Paul then went on to call me a fucking fatty fat. The issue is that if we create an obsession with a particular thing, for example, candy and sweets and chocolate is a great example. We, as a society, have told people you can only have sweets if you finish your dinner. You can only have sweets in very moderated amounts because otherwise it'll make you a big fatty fat, which makes us fucking obsessed with that thing. We teach children that you can only have one piece of Halloween candy at a time, and that means that we end up with kids who sneak their fucking Halloween candy out of the closet and get sick because they eat so much of it. We don't teach people how to engage with something that is interesting to them without healthily moderating and monitoring their bodily messages. We all know that if we eat only sweets for like hours on end, that we're going to feel sick. Teaching people how to recognize that from a bottom-up perspective is a much more valuable tool than telling people, no, you can't have it. You can only do it this way. It's only good if you do it that way, because it creates a fascination with it, which leads to binging, which can sometimes then lead to purging. The restriction binge cycle is a very often studied and well-supported phenomenon in psychology for a reason. So if instead of creating this weird little bubble around a thing which makes us obsessed with wanting it, we give people access to something when it's safe, obviously, in a way that promotes our best practices around it, we can decrease the fixation with it and therefore decrease our purging or our binging behavior.
The issue that the sex isn't universally appealing, or is the issue that sex as a selling point for fiction has become one of the most important aspects of the reading experience. And if that's true, why is that? I've read so many essays and articles and quotes written by men and women over the years who talk like sex is literally a mandatory element of fiction, whether it's a writer talking about how books without sex are insincere, or Philip Pullman, who apparently can't figure out where elf babies come from unless he can read an explicit account of the moment of conception. Things like this are so incredibly silly to me. I'm tempted to make a joke about Philip Pullman being unable to comprehend where the people he sees on the street come from unless he watched the act of conception with his own eyes. But there's no way he's that stupid. I mean that sincerely, there's no way. In which case, the only other explanation is that he's just trying to make an excuse for how badly he wants there to be lots of sex in books for him to both read and write.
Okay.
In that sense, one could argue that as ludicrous and worrying as it is that women are becoming so obsessed with the smut in their fiction, at least they're not pretending that they're in it for anything else. So many writers have repeated the same nonsensical argument that because sex is a natural part of the human condition, failing to include it in your novel would make it unrealistic or disingenuous. What strikes me the most about this argument is the lack of self-awareness. Bowel movements are also a natural part of the human condition, but I don't see people using bowel movement scenes to sell books. I also don't see that many bowel movements in Romantasy. For that matter, childbirth is also a natural part of the human condition, and while that's a bit more likely to make it into a novel than a bowel movement, it also doesn't get championed the way sex does. Gosh, I wonder why that is.
Not the boohoo motherhood isn't centered in our life. Whatever. I also want to point out what a false dichotomy this is. Of course, people are interested in sex. It is a very commonly utilized behavior. It's, first of all, from an evolutionary perspective, of course, we're interested in sex. It's the way that our species reproduces, and our bodies are designed to be interested in that because it's responsible for the proliferation of our species. Second of all, we just want to feel good. We just want to feel good, man, especially in fucking capitalist hellscape. People just want to enjoy things. Fuck people, I guess, for wanting to experience pleasure. You know what? We're just going to keep going. I'm going to shut up.
I'm of the mind that certain things are better handled with restraint. As I said before,
Yeah,
the largest group of
that's clear.
people who have worked so tirelessly to normalize the consumption of erotic media are people whose sole motivation is profit. They do not care about female empowerment.
Yeah.
They don't even care about female health.
Sure.
They just care about female money. So I think it might be time for females to wake up. But while women are waking up, maybe it wouldn't be the worst thing for the gents to also take stock. You know that old thing that was everywhere a few years ago? You know, you have two wolves fighting inside you and the one that wins is the one that you feed. We all have so much inside us. If we feed the impulse to obsess over sex, that's what we will become. And on a long enough timeline, we'll become a perverted sex addict. The same goes for society. Maybe things in literature are the way they are because we've been feeding perversion for too long. Now there are no other strong hunters.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
The take that we as a society should starve ourselves of our interest in sex so as to fix the problem with sex being too present in a lot of modern literature is nonsensical, first of all. Also, not a realistic expectation. And 3, it's not the problem. We got so close to the point. Which is that literature, media, our exposure to creative material generally is being held hostage by capitalism. In a world where the production of media is not limited by the fixation, the obsession, the necessity of making as much money as humanly possible, there's more space for us to explore material that doesn't include the things that are most often picked, right? We all know that sex sells. Yes, she's correct about that. And that doesn't mean that sex being included in media is the reason that we're not getting access to media that is thought-provoking and interesting and novel. The reason that that's happening is because publishers only care about making money. Capitalism is the problem, babe, not the sex. It's not the sex, it's the money. Money is the root of all evil. Oh, it's exhausting. The other issue with this whole video is that we essentially went on this very long, nonsensical rant about purity culture and did not acknowledge at all that none of that is supported by facts, but then use that as justification for saying that we should all starve ourselves of our interest in sex so as to reduce its prevalence in modern literature. That's not happening. Because again, the truth is that the people who own and produce media are interested in profits first and foremost. So they're going to use the most simplistic formula to make money. That's the problem. If we as a society were not held captive by billionaire elites' obsession with making as much money as possible, then we can free up our space as human beings to explore our creative outlets and produce novel and interesting and not popular forms of media. This is not a complex take, I feel. This whole video, thank you to whoever recommended this because it is cuckoo bananas and we haven't done a video like this in a hot minute. So I hope that you guys enjoyed. It's so hot in this room because I'm irritated and frustrated and I've just been yelling for like an hour. So if you like the video, We talk about stuff like this sometimes, but often we make educational and pop culture related content. So stay for that. And then you can share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. And I'll see you guys next Saturday. Okay, bye.